The Arizona sky burned crimson that evening, but the color felt different and heavier, almost like it carried the scent of blood. Calder Holt, a lone rancher, rode his horse toward Cottonwood Creek, the place where his father once drew water when this land was still wild. But the creek had dried long ago, leaving behind cracked mud and silence. There, standing tall in the dust, was an old cottonwood tree, and from its heavy branch hung 7 bodies, swaying faintly in the wind. Apache girls. Calder froze, his chest tightening. Each face told a story of fear, pain, innocence stolen. For a moment, he thought it was a nightmare. Then his horse snorted, breaking the stillness. It was all real. He jumped from the saddle, knife flashing as he cut the first rope. The bodies were lighted too light. His hands shook as he laid them down. Then one of the girls moved. Calder pressed his ear to her chin till she was alive. He cut the rest down, counting breaths, whispering prayers. 9 still lived. He gave them water, wrapped them in his blanket. When the oldest opened her eyes, she whispered her name and !! Her voice was raw, trembling. "Fort Sundown," she rasped. "Captain Briggs, a broken bar, he did this." Calder's heart sank. He knew that name. Harlan Briggs, the officer who called his hatred duty and his cruelty law. Night fell. Calder built a small fire and sat beside the girls, staring into the flames. The desert was silent except for the crackle of burning wood. He could still hear the ropes creak, still see their small feet swaying in his mind. His anger hardened into something cold and deliberate. He'd fought wars before, but never one like this. This wasn't about land or pride, it was about souls, about what kind of man he was willing to be. He looked toward the north, where Fort Sundown sat beyond the ridges, and made a promise in the dark. Before dawn, justice would ride. The early hours brought a biting wind. Calder loaded his horsey rifle. Water, a few bullets. Tried to speak, her voice breaking. "They'll come for us," she said. "They kill to erase what they've done." Calder looked at her and nodded. "Not this time." He told them to hide among the rocks, then mounted and rode off through the dark. Cottonwood Creek disappeared behind him like a ghost swallowed by dust. By dusk, he reached the outskirts of Fort Sundown. Laughter echoed from the barracks, men drinking, the glow of lanterns flickering through tent flaps. Calder crouched among the rocks, his heart steady but his blood burning. Then he saw a wagon rolling out from the fort, marked with the U.S. Army seal. He followed quietly until it stopped by a ravine. A soldier pried open one of the wooden crates. Calder's jaw tightened. The box was filled with tiny bones. Children. His stomach turned cold. That moment, something inside him broke. He walked straight into the fort, rifle drawn. The guards barely noticed until it was too late. In the command office, Captain Briggs looked up from his desk, surprised but calm. "Mr. Holt," he said with a smirk, "I hear you've taken a liking to the savages." Calder's eyes burned. "You don't get to call anyone savage," he said. "You're not a soldier, you're a coward in uniform." Briggs laughed. "I am the law here." One shot silenced him forever. The gun fired at the night. Powder stores ignited. Tents erupted in flame. Soldiers ran shouting through the smoke, but Calder didn't stay to see the fort crumble. He turned his horse and rode back into the desert. Behind him, Fort Sundown burned like a hell meant for men who'd forgotten their souls. By sunrise, Calder reached Cottonwood Creek again. The 3 surviving girls were waiting. Their faces were streaked with dust and tears, but their eyes carried peace. He didn't speak. He simply nodded. "No one will come for you now." He took them to his ranch, far from the fort's ashes. There, the wind blew softer, and the horizon looked clean again. Years later, people said that at night near Cottonwood Creek, you could hear the faint sound of girls laughing and a single horse galloping through the sand. Some called it a ghost story. Others said it was justice that never left. Calder Holt never told anyone what truly happened. He didn't need to. He understood one truth: some battles aren't fought for glory or revenge, but to remind the world that mercy still exists. Dawn broke slow and pale across the Arizona desert, the kind of light that didn't warm but only revealed the dust and silence left behind. Calder Holt tightened the saddle straps on his horse and took one last look at the horizon. The air was sharp, filled with the dry breath of the wasteland. Behind him, The faint shapes of the three Apache girls, the survivors, stood like ghosts near the cottonwood tree. Their eyes followed him, filled with fear and something else too, a hope, fragile but alive. Calder nodded once, a silent promise, then he turned his horse toward Fort Sundown, the place where Justice had been strangled and buried in the sand. The sun had barely risen when the fort came into view. From afar, it looked peaceful, the American flag flapping lazily against the blue sky, soldiers moving about in rhythm, smoke from breakfast fires curling upward. But Calder knew what rotted beneath that calm. He'd seen enough wars to recognize the smell of guilt. He tied his horse among the rocks of a dry ridge and waited. The day passed slow. He watched wagons roll in and out, the laughter of soldiers carrying across the open ground. And then, as evening fell and shadows stretched long, he saw something that turned his stomach to stone. A small wagon was being loaded with wooden crates, too small, too light. When the guards left, Calder slipped down the slope, moving like a shadow. The wagon was unguarded now, the firelight flickering over the dull markings of the U.S. Army seal. He pried open a crate. Inside were small bones wrapped in cloth, the bones of children. He froze, unable to breathe. His hands trembled as he lifted a piece of faded beadwork, once part of a child's necklace. He clenched his jaw. The rage that had been simmering in his blood now roared like thunder. These men hadn't just killed they tried to erase. He covered the box again, stood, and looked at the command building where Captain Harlan Briggs worked late each night. His decision was already made. Calder moved through the fort like a ghost. The guards were drunk or careless, their laughter echoing off the barracks. Inside the command tent, a lantern burned low, throwing yellow light over maps and whiskey bottles. Briggs sat behind his desk, writing. His uniform was spotless, his revolver polished. He looked up when the door opened and saw Calder standing there, dusty, silent, a revolver already drawn. For a moment, the two men just stared. "Mr. Holt," Briggs said slowly, his lips curling into a smirk, "I heard you've taken a liking to the savages. You really think they're worth dying for?" His voice was calm, dripping with arrogance. Calder stepped closer, the barrel steady. "You killed them," Calder said, voice low and cold. "You hung 7 girls and buried their bones like secrets. You call that justice?" Briggs laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Justice is what keeps this land clean, Holt. You think you can build a country without blood?" He poured himself another drink, unbothered. "You and us same kind of men, just on different sides of history." Calder's jaw tightened. "The only thing separating us," he said, "is that I still know the difference between man and monster." The words hung heavy in the air. Then a single gunshot broke the silence. Briggs fell back, eyes wide, blood staining his uniform. The glass shattered beside him. Calder holstered his revolver. For a long moment, everything was still. Then the fort erupted into chaos. A guard burst in, shouting, but Calder was already gone. Outside, he grabbed a torch from a nearby post and hurled it into the nearest barrel of oil. Flames roared up instantly, climbing into the night sky. The wind caught them, spreading fire from tent to tent, from wagon to wall. Soldiers shouted, some running for water, others for cover. Ammunition stores began to explode, sending bursts of orange light across the desert. Calder moved through the fire like a shadow of vengeance. He wasn't thinking anymore, he was something else now, something primal. When the last powder house went up, the whole fort became an inferno. The flag burned, the walls cracked, and screams echoed across the canyon. Calder mounted his horse, the animal trembling beneath him from the heat and sound. He rode hard through the smoke, his coat flaring, his eyes fixed on the distant hills. Behind him, Fort Sundown collapsed into ashes, a monument of cruelty erased by fire. The night air was thick with smoke and sorrow, but Calder didn't look back. He didn't need to. Justice, in its rawest form, had already been delivered. He rode through the night until the flames were nothing but a faint red glow on the horizon. The stars returned, cold and bright. His mind drifted to the faces of the girls he'd left hidden near the creek. He could almost hear their voices, their fear, their gratitude. For the first time in years, his heart felt heavy and clean at once. He wasn't sure if what he'd done was right or wrong, but he knew it was necessary. Sometimes, righteousness didn't come dressed in corrupt, it came in gunfire and flame. By dawn, Calder reached Cottonwood Creek. The sun spilled gold over the desert, touching every stone and scar of the land. The girls were waiting, huddled together near the ashes of the fire he'd built the night before. When they saw him, they stood, their eyes searching his face. Nay, Tilda inverted exclamation mark stepped forward first. "It's over?" she asked softly. Calder nodded once. "It's over." For a moment, none of them spoke. Then the smallest of the girls began to cry, quiet at first, then harder, her hands covering her face. Calder knelt, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. "No one will find you." His voice broke just a little on the last word. They stayed there until the sun climbed high, its light washing the world clean again. Calder gathered the girls and led them back to his ranch, a lonely stretch of land between two ridges, where the wind whispered through broken fences and wildflowers grew where bullets had once fallen. The girls worked the land with him for weeks, slowly learning to smile again. He taught them to ride, to mend fences, to plant seeds. At night, he told them stories not of war, but of stars, rain, and the peace he'd once known. In their laughter, faint but real, he found something close to redemption. Months later, Calder's name disappeared from the wanted posters. Fort Sundown was listed in the records as an accident, an explosion. No culprit found. The army built a new post elsewhere, and people forgot. But the locals near Cottonwood Creek never did. They whispered that sometimes, on windless nights, the ghost of a rancher rode across the plains, a lantern swinging from his saddle, 7 shadows trailing behind him like guardians. Some said it was just a story to scare travelers. Others said it was Calder Holt, still keeping watch, still riding for those who never had a voice. Calder himself never spoke of that night again. He carried its weight quietly, like a scar beneath the skin. When the girls were grown, he gave them his land, his tools, and his horse, then rode off one morning without a word. No one saw where he went, but years later, they found a cross of driftwood near the old cottonwood tree, carved with just 2 words, "For them." And so the story of Fort Sundown faded into dust and legend. The world called him an outlaw, some called him a ghost, but to those who knew the truth, Calder Holt was the man who burned a fort to save humanity's soul.